If you're just getting into home brewing, I have an easy chai pear cider recipe that anyone can make at home. It's a refreshing fall beverage that is slightly sweet and flavored with chai spices. I'm Trent Musho, and this is The Brew Show. Let's make chai pear cider. Making pear cider is very similar to making apple cider, and just as easy. The only real difference is the fruit or juice that is used to make it. In general, I find pears to be a bit sweeter and have a less distinct flavor than apples, but of course that's dependent on the variety. And that's why I'm taking this pear cider to the next level by adding some complexity with a bit of chai tea. Chai spices often consist of cardamom, allspice, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and ginger, the quintessential spices of autumn. You might also see pear cider labeled as perry, and those terms can be used interchangeably, but technically a perry is made specifically from perry pears. But today, I'm keeping things simple and just using store-bought pear juice. If you have access to pure 100% juice, that is perfect, but all my local grocery store had was this canned pear nectar from concentrate. Not perfect, but as long as it doesn't have preservatives like sorbates, sulfites, or benzoates, you'll be good to go. These preservatives will inhibit the yeast we add from doing their job. Before jumping in, if you're interested in homebrewing and want simplified techniques and recipes, please take a second to subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. And I'll also have links to the ingredients and equipment I use in the description box. Now, let's brew. This recipe calls for 1.5 gallons of juice and will yield just about 1.25 gallons once complete. Feel free to scale this recipe up or down to make as much as you like. If you want to know the final alcohol percentage, before getting started we need to take an original gravity reading. Using a hydrometer, I found this particular pear juice has an original gravity of 1.047. Now I put the juice in a fermenter. I'm using a 2-gallon food-safe bucket, but use whatever fermenter you have at home. Large mason jars or jugs work fine. Just make sure your fermenter and anything else that comes into contact with your cider is clean and sanitized. This will ensure no wild yeast or bacteria infect your cider, making it taste bad. Next, I add yeast nutrient. Yeast nutrients feed the yeast so I have healthy, happy yeast, and I can limit off flavors that come from a weak yeast colony. It will also help get fermentation started faster and fully ferment in a timely manner. Yeast nutrient isn't required but is recommended. Speaking of yeast, I'm using Lavlin EC1118 champagne yeast. To me, pear ciders should be crisp and sparkling, and this yeast is a perfect fit. But feel free to use whatever yeast you have on hand or feel like using. Yeast can have a major impact on flavor, so play around and find one that you like. Using a sanitized spoon, I give everything a good stir to mix in the nutrient, yeast, and incorporate oxygen. Oxygen is important as fermentation starts, so that the yeast can use it to convert sugars into alcohol. But once fermentation is in effect, it's important to avoid oxygen as much as possible, or else you can risk oxidizing your cider, leading to off flavors later on. Once everything is incorporated, I add a top and an airlock to allow CO2 to escape and not let anything in. I set the fermenter in a cool, dark area and allow it to ferment for 1 week until the airlock bubbling slows down. At that point, I take a final gravity reading and get a reading of 0.997, which means this cider clocks in at 6.6%. We officially have pear cider. Now, it's time to add the chai of the chai pear cider. For that, I'm going to take a small sample of the finished cider and prepare a dosing experiment to see how much chai tea I want to add. I start by making a strong batch of chai tea with these tea bags. Feel free to use any tea you like. I use 4 bags and about 400 milliliters of boiling water. Then I measure out 3 100 milliliter samples of the cider into glasses. Using a pipette or accurate liquid measurement tool, I take samples of the chai tea and put them into the glasses of cider. I start small with 1, 2, and 5 milliliters and work my way up, refreshing my glasses with cider and upping the dosage until I find the perfect amount of chai tea to add. For me, I found 20 milliliters of chai tea per 100 milliliters of cider to be the perfect ratio. So I took a look at how much cider was left in my fermenter, and with a little math, I scaled the amounts up to determine how much is needed for the whole batch. And for me, that came out to 950 milliliters of strong chai tea. So I just made that much tea to the same ratios of strength as before. These are the steps I take anytime I want to add an adjunct flavor to my home brew. That way I can be as precise as possible and not over or underdo it. It makes it less of a guessing game and you can get the flavor you want. Before the tea cools down, I decided to add my priming sugar for bottling so that it can fully dissolve. If you're not bottling, you can skip this step, but I just used my favorite priming calculator to get the amount of sugar needed to create the right amount of pressure in the bottle and added it to the warm tea. If you want to know more about bottle conditioning, I go into more detail in my apple pie hard cider video. Be sure to check that out. Then I just set that in the fridge to chill down to room temperature, and when it's cool, I add it to my bottling bucket and then rack or transfer my finished cider on top, being careful not to splash too much to reduce the risk of oxidation. Once it's all in the bucket, I use a siphon and a bottling wand to fill up the bottles. Finally, I cap them up and set them in a cool, dark place for 2 weeks to build pressure. And at that point, the pear cider is ready to drink. On the nose, I get a light floral hint, with spices coming forward inviting me to take a sip. It has a subtle dry pear flavor, backed by the chai tea at the end. The spices aren't overwhelming and perfectly complement the pear. I think without the chai tea, it would be quite plain and lacking character. And the carbonation is just right, and prickles on the tongue like I was hoping. If you have any suggestions on flavors I should try, or any other things that you would like to see from me, I'd love to know. Let me know if you have any questions about making cider. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this.